You know what hurts the most? It's not being forgotten. It's being invisible while you're still breathing, still hoping, still loving with everything you have left in your old heart. My name is Barbara. I'm 78 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been living in what my children call the best nursing home in town. What they don't say is that it's also the most convenient way to keep me out of their perfect lives. But before I tell you about the day that changed everything, let me paint you a picture of how I got here. I wasn't always this frail old woman sitting by the window, watching the world go by. I was Barbara Mitchell, the woman who raised 4 children practically on her own after my husband died in a car accident when I was 45. I was the mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. I was the woman who attended every single school play, every graduation, every wedding, believing that family was everything. I had Michael, my eldest son, who became a successful lawyer. There's Jennifer, who married well and lives in a mansion across town. Then there's David, who runs his own business, and finally Susan, who moved to California and only calls on holidays. 4 children I poured my soul into raising, and somehow I ended up being the inconvenience they had to manage. The transition to Sunset Manor wasn't my choice. It happened gradually, like most betrayals do. First, it was Michael suggesting I might be safer with professional care after I had a small fall in my kitchen. Then Jennifer joined in, talking about how worried they all were, how they couldn't focus on their own families knowing I was alone. David, always the practical one, presented the financial arguments about how much more cost-effective it would be. And Susan, well, Susan just agreed with whatever the others decided from her comfortable distance in Los Angeles. I fought it, of course. I told them I was fine, that I just needed maybe someone to check on me once in a while. But they had already made up their minds. They toured facilities without me, made decisions about my life without consulting me, and presented it as a done deal. "Mom, you'll love it there," Jennifer said with that bright fake smile she reserves for unpleasant conversations. "They have activities and people your age to talk to, and professional staff who know how to take care of you properly." What she didn't say was that it meant they wouldn't have to take care of me at all. The first few months at Sunset Manor were the hardest. I kept expecting them to visit regularly, to include me in family decisions, to remember that I was still their mother. But visits became sporadic, then scheduled, then obligatory. Phone calls turned into brief check-ins that felt more like items being crossed off a to-do list than genuine conversations with someone they loved. I watched other residents whose families came every week, who were taken out for dinners and shopping trips, who were still integral parts of their children's lives. I smiled and pretended I wasn't jealous, pretended I understood that my children were busy with their own lives, their own problems, their own priorities that somehow never included me. I vividly remember the day I realized I had become a stranger to my own children. It was on a Sunday in October, during one of Michael's scheduled visits. He arrived with his wife Linda and their 2 teenage children, Tyler and Madison. They sat with me in the visiting room for exactly 45 minutes, talking about the weather, about Michael's business, about vacation plans that didn't include me. Tyler, my 16-year-old grandson, spent the entire visit on his phone. When I tried to ask about school, he responded with monosyllables without looking up from the screen. Madison, 14, seemed physically uncomfortable, as if being near me was contagious. Linda made polite conversation about the activities at the nursing home, but I could see in her eyes that she wanted to be anywhere but there. And Michael. Michael kept checking his watch throughout the entire visit. "Well, Mom," he said finally, standing up, "we need to go. We promised the kids we'd take them to the mall today." "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for coming." But when they left, I sat in my chair and cried. I cried because I realized that to my own children, I had become an obligation, a task to be completed, a box to be checked on their busy schedules. Jennifer's visits followed a similar pattern. She would show up once a month, always perfectly dressed, always with a ready excuse for why she couldn't stay long. She would talk about her children, about school activities, about vacations they were planning, about the life she was living without me. I had become an audience for the narrative of her life, not a participant in it. David was the most practical of all. His visits were purely functional. He would check if I was taking my medications, if I was satisfied with the care, if I needed anything. He treated me like a project that needed to be efficiently managed. He never asked how I was feeling emotionally, never asked if I was lonely, never asked if I missed the family. And Susan. Susan called every 2 weeks, always during her work hours in California, always in a hurry. "Hi, Mom, just wanted to check how you are. Everything okay? Great, I need to run to a meeting. Love you." I began to wonder if they really loved me, or if they just felt obligated to say it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. I had been feeling particularly down that week. The weather had been gray and rainy, and I had spent most of my days sitting in the common room, half watching television programs that didn't interest me. I felt invisible, irrelevant, like I was just waiting to die. The sadness was so heavy, I could barely lift my head, and for the first time in my life, I wondered if everyone would be better off without me. I was thinking terrible things that day, thinking whether anyone would care if I simply didn't wake up the next morning, thinking whether my children would be genuinely sad or just feel guilty for a while before moving on with their busy lives, thinking whether I had wasted my life, whether all the sacrifices I made for them meant nothing in the end. That's when I met Tommy. Tommy was 7 years old, visiting his great-grandmother Martha, who lived down the hall from my room. Martha had been at Sunset Manor for about 6 months, and unlike me, she had a steady stream of visitors. Her family treated her like she was still an important part of their lives, not an obligation to be managed. I was sitting in my usual spot by the window, tears streaming down my face, when I heard a small voice say, "Don't cry, Grandma, I see you." I looked up to see this little boy with curly brown hair and the most compassionate eyes I'd ever seen in a child. He was wearing a superhero t-shirt and had a gap where his front tooth used to be, and he was looking at me with such genuine concern that it took my breath away. "I'm not your grandma, sweetie," I managed to say, wiping my eyes. I'm just sad today." "I know you're not my grandma," he said, climbing into the chair next to mine without invitation. "But you look like you need a grandma hug, and I'm really good at those. My great-grandma Martha taught me." And just like that, this little boy I'd never met before wrapped his small arms around me and hugged me like I mattered, like I was worth comforting, like I was visible. "Why are you sad?" he asked, settling back into his chair but keeping one small hand on my arm. "How do you explain to a 7-year-old that you feel forgotten by the people who are supposed to love you most? How do you tell a child that sometimes being alive feels like a burden you're placing on everyone else?" "Sometimes grown-ups get sad when they feel lonely," I said carefully. "Are you lonely? Where's your family?" The innocent question hit me like a physical blow. They're busy with their own lives." Tommy considered this for a moment with the seriousness that only children can bring to important matters. "That's not right," he said finally. "Family is supposed to take care of each other. That's what my mom says." For the next hour, Tommy sat with me. He told me about his school, his friends, his pet goldfish named Captain Bubbles. He showed me the drawing he'd made for his great-grandma Martha, a colorful picture of their family with everyone holding hands. He asked me questions about my life, listened to my answers with genuine interest, and treated me like I was someone worth knowing. When his parents came to collect him, he hugged me again. "I'll see you next week, okay? I come to visit Great-Grandma Martha every Tuesday." "You don't have to," I started to say. "I want to," he interrupted. "You're nice, and you listen to my stories. Plus, you need more hugs." After Tommy left, I sat in that chair for a long time, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, seen. This little boy, who owed me nothing, had given me more attention and genuine care in one afternoon than my own children had given me in months. True to his word, Tommy came back the following Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. It became our routine. He would visit his great-grandma Martha, and then he'd spend time with me, sharing stories about his week and listening to mine. He brought me drawings he'd made at school, asked me to help him with his homework, and even convinced his parents to let him bring me cookies his class had made for a bake sale. Through Tommy, I met his parents, Sarah and Mark, who were in their early 30s and genuinely kind people. They never acted like spending time with me was a burden. Sarah would often join our conversations, asking about my life with real interest. Mark would help me with crossword puzzles and share stories about his work. They treated me like I was Tommy's honorary grandmother, including me in their family jokes and traditions. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and Mark was an elementary school teacher. They had a simple life, but rich in love and genuine attention to each other. When Sarah came home tired from work, Mark had already prepared dinner and helped Tommy with his homework. When Mark had difficult days at school, Sarah listened to him with patience and offered practical advice. It was the kind of family I had always dreamed of having, but somehow never managed to build with my own children. The contrast between Tommy's family and my own children became more painful with each passing week. When Tommy got sick with the flu and missed 2 visits, he drew me a picture from his bed and had his mother bring it to me with a note that said, "Get well soon, Grandma Barbara. Love, Tommy." When I mentioned my upcoming birthday, Sarah asked what kind of cake I liked and showed up the next week with a homemade chocolate cake and a small celebration. Meanwhile, my own children had forgotten my birthday entirely until Jennifer called 3 days later with a distracted, "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. Things have been crazy here." I remember sitting on my bed that night, looking at the remains of the chocolate cake Sarah had made for me, and crying. Not from sadness, but from a complex mixture of gratitude and grief. Gratitude for having found people who valued me, grief for having taken so long to find them. If you're enjoying this story of how one small act of kindness changed everything, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories about the unexpected connections that can transform our lives. The weeks turned into months, and my friendship with Tommy and his family continued to grow. They included me in their weekend traditions, taking me to picnics in the park, inviting me to dinner at their house on Sundays. I had become part of their lives in a way I had never been part of my own children's lives, even when they were small. Tommy introduced me to his friends as my Grandma Barbara, and I felt a pride and joy I hadn't experienced in years. He told me about his adventures at school, his fears, his dreams, his discoveries about the world. I had become his confidant, his advisor, his #1 cheerleader. There was something pure and uncomplicated about our relationship. Tommy didn't visit me out of obligation or guilt. He visited me because he enjoyed my company, because our conversations made him feel heard and valued, because I treated him like his ideas and feelings mattered. And me? I discovered I still had a lot of love to give, that I still had wisdom to share, that I still had value as a person, even in my advanced age. One particular Tuesday stands out in my memory. Tommy had arrived earlier than usual and found me in the activities room trying to do a puzzle by myself. My arthritic hands were having trouble manipulating the small pieces, and I was getting frustrated. "Can I help?" he asked, sliding into the chair beside me. "Of course, dear, but it's a difficult puzzle. It might be too boring for you." "It won't be boring if we're doing it together," he said with the simple wisdom that children sometimes possess. We spent the next hour working on the puzzle together. Tommy found pieces I couldn't see, and I helped him figure out where they fit. We talked about everything and nothing, about his plans for the summer, about my memories of when I was a child, about how fun it was to solve problems together. When we finished the puzzle, Tommy leaned back in his chair and smiled at me. "Grandma Barbara, you're really smart. You knew where all the pieces went. You're very smart too, Tommy, and more importantly, you're kind. You helped me when I needed help. That's what families do," he said simply. They help each other. Later that week, I received a phone call from Michael. It was rare for him to call outside of scheduled times, so I was worried something was wrong. "Mom," he said, his voice sounding distant and formal, "we need to talk about your finances." "My finances? What about them?" "Well, Linda and I are thinking about expanding our business, and we were hoping you could help us with a loan. You know, you have that house just sitting there, and it's gaining a lot of value." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Are you asking me to sell my house?" "Not sell, necessarily, but maybe take out a second mortgage. Or you could transfer the property to us now, and we'd take care of everything. It would be easier for you not to have to worry about it." "And where would I live if I decided to leave the nursing home?" There was a long pause. "Mom, you're not leaving the nursing home. You're well cared for there. And besides, you can't live alone anymore." "Who decided that?" "We decided, all of us. It's for your own good." I hung up the phone, feeling more alone than ever. My children had not only put me in the nursing home and visited me out of obligation, but now they wanted my house too. They wanted to remove the last piece of independence I had left, the last place that was still mine. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the difference between how Tommy treated me and how my own children treated me. Tommy saw me as a person with feelings, thoughts, and value. My children saw me as a resource to be managed, a problem to be solved, a responsibility to be endured. The difference was devastating. The final blow came 6 months after meeting Tommy. It was a Sunday in September, and I was having one of my bad days. The arthritis in my hands was acting up. I had received another impersonal phone call from Michael that felt more like a welfare check than a conversation with his mother, and I had watched 3 other residents get taken out for family dinners while I sat alone in my room. Earlier that morning, I had gone through an experience that completely broke me. I was walking through the corridors of the nursing home when I heard familiar voices coming from the visiting room. It was Jennifer and David, talking quietly, but not quietly enough. "She's getting harder to deal with," Jennifer was saying. "Last time I visited her, she seemed to want me to stay forever. It's like she doesn't understand that I have my own life." "I know," David replied, "and now she's resisting the idea of signing the house papers. Michael says she needs to be more realistic about her situation. Maybe we should talk to the doctor about her mental capacity. I mean, she's getting old, and sometimes elderly people get stubborn about things that don't make sense." I stood in the hallway, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. My own children were questioning my mental capacity because I didn't want to give up my house. They were talking about me like I was a disobedient child, not their mother who had raised them and sacrificed for them. I went back to my room and cried harder than I had cried in years. I cried for the loss of the children I thought I had raised. I cried for the realization that, to them, I had become an inconvenient burden. I cried because I realized that even my own family didn't see me as a person with rights and feelings. I was crying again, sitting in the same chair where Tommy had first found me, when I heard his familiar voice. "Don't cry, Grandma. I see you." I looked up to see Tommy standing there with his parents, all 3 of them wearing concerned expressions. Tommy immediately climbed into the chair next to mine and put his arms around me. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Did something happen?" How do you explain to a 7-year-old that you're crying because you feel worthless, that you're questioning whether your life has any meaning left, that you're starting to wonder if your children would be relieved if you just disappeared? "I'm feeling very sad today," I said, trying to compose myself. "Is it because your family doesn't visit enough?" Tommy asked with that brutal honesty that children possess. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances. They had been visiting for months now, and it was obvious to them that I rarely had other visitors. They had pieced together that my children existed, but weren't very present in my life. "Sometimes I feel like I don't matter to anyone anymore," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. "That's not true," Tommy said firmly. "You matter to me. You matter to Mom and Dad too, right?" Sarah sat down on my other side and took my hand. "Barbara, you matter to us so much. Tommy talks about you all week between visits. You've become part of our family." "And you know what?" Mark added, pulling up another chair. "We've been thinking about asking if you'd like to come to Tommy's birthday party next month. He specifically requested that we invite you." I started crying harder then. But these were different tears. These were tears of gratitude, of feeling valued, of being wanted rather than tolerated. "I would love that," I whispered. Tommy's birthday party was everything I'd dreamed family gatherings could be. Sarah and Mark's extended family welcomed me warmly, asking about my life, including me in conversations, treating me like I belonged there. Tommy introduced me to his friends as my Grandma Barbara, and I felt a pride and joy I hadn't experienced in years. But the real revelation came when I was helping Sarah clean up after the party. We were alone in the kitchen, and she said something that changed my entire perspective. "Barbara, I hope you know how much you mean to Tommy, and to us. He's learned so much about kindness and compassion from you. You've been such a gift in his life." "A gift?" I repeated, stunned. "Absolutely. He's learned that family isn't just about blood relations. He's learned about treating elderly people with respect and dignity. He's learned that everyone has stories worth hearing and that everyone deserves to feel valued. You've taught him things we never could have taught him on our own." I realized then that while my own children saw me as a burden, Tommy's family saw me as a blessing. While my children visited out of obligation, Tommy visited out of love. While my children made me feel like I was taking up space in their lives, Tommy made me feel like I was adding value to his. That night, I made a decision that had been building for months. I called my lawyer. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, when I explained what I wanted to do, "are you sure about this? This is a significant change to your will." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I told him. My original will had split my estate equally among my 4 children. I had a modest savings account, some investments, and most importantly, my house, which I'd kept even after moving to Sunset Manor. The house was now worth quite a bit, sitting on a prime piece of property in a neighborhood that had become very desirable. In total, my estate was worth about $400,000, which would have meant $100,000 for each of my children. But that was before Tommy showed me what real love looked like. I rewrote my will to leave everything to Tommy with the provision that it would be held in trust until he turned 18. I also wrote letters to each of my children explaining my decision. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't about revenge or anger, but about love and recognition. The letters were the hardest part. How do you tell your children that a 7-year-old boy had shown you more love and attention than they had in years? How do you explain that you'd found a family who valued you with people who shared no blood relation to you? I wrote about every Tuesday Tommy had spent with me, every drawing he'd made, every story he'd shared. I wrote about how his parents had included me in their lives, how they'd made me feel like I mattered. I wrote about the birthday party, the homemade cake, the genuine care they'd shown me. And I wrote about the loneliness they'd left me with, the visits that felt like obligation, the phone calls that felt like check-ins on a piece of property rather than conversations with their mother. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I wrote in each letter. "I'm doing this to honor the love I've been given. Tommy and his family have shown me what it means to be truly valued, and I want to ensure that love is recognized and rewarded." I sealed the letters and gave them to my lawyer with instructions that they should be delivered only after my death, along with copies of the new will. For the next 2 years, I continued my Tuesday visits with Tommy. I watched him grow from 7 to 9, helped him with school projects, celebrated his achievements, and comforted him through his disappointments. His family continued to include me in their lives, and I found a peace and happiness I'd never expected to find in my final years. During those 2 years, I witnessed moments that solidified my decision every single day. There was the time Tommy came to visit me with a black eye from a playground fight, and instead of hiding it or making excuses, he climbed into my lap and told me the whole story. He had been defending a smaller kid who was being bullied, and even though he got hurt, he was proud of standing up for someone who needed help. "Sometimes doing the right thing hurts," he said, touching his swollen eye gingerly. "But it still feels good inside." That wisdom, from a 7-year-old boy, taught me more about integrity than any sermon I'd ever heard. There was the time Sarah got food poisoning and couldn't make the Tuesday visit. Mark called to let me know, but Tommy insisted on speaking to me himself. "Grandma Barbara, I'm really sorry I can't come see you today. Mom is sick and needs me to take care of her, but I drew you a picture of us having tea together, and Dad will bring it tomorrow, okay?" The next day, Mark appeared with not just the drawing, but also a thermos of homemade chicken soup that Tommy had helped him make. He was worried you might be sad without your Tuesday visit, Mark explained. So he wanted to make sure you had something to make you feel better. My own children, meanwhile, continued their pattern of distant obligation. Michael's visits became even more infrequent, and when he did come, he spent most of the time on his phone dealing with work calls. Jennifer's monthly visits turned into bi-monthly, then quarterly. David's functional check-ins became shorter and more perfunctory. And Susan's calls from California became so brief and distracted that I started to wonder if she was even listening to my responses. The contrast was stark and painful. While my own grandchildren had never learned my middle name or remembered my birthday, Tommy knew that I preferred Earl Grey tea over English breakfast, that I had been afraid of thunderstorms as a child, and that my favorite flower was a daisy because they reminded me of my own mother. One particularly memorable Tuesday, Tommy arrived with a small potted daisy plant he had grown from seeds in his school's garden project. "I remembered you said daisies were your favorite," he said, carefully placing the pot on my windowsill. "I wanted to give you something that would make you happy every day, not just when I visit." I cried that day, but they were tears of joy. This 9-year-old boy had remembered a casual comment I'd made months earlier and had spent weeks growing something special just for me. When was the last time any of my own children had done something thoughtful just because they wanted to make me happy? The daisy plant became a symbol of our relationship. Every Tuesday, Tommy would check on it, water it if needed, and we'd talk about how it was growing. Just like our friendship, it flourished with attention and care. My own children, oblivious to the deep relationship I'd formed with Tommy and his family, continued to treat me like a problem to be managed. The pressure about the house continued, with increasingly aggressive suggestions that I should be practical and think about the future. What they really meant was that they wanted me to think about their future, not mine. The final straw came during what would be my last conversation with Michael. He had called on a Thursday evening, unusual for him since he typically called on Sunday afternoons at exactly 2 p.m. "Mom, we need to talk seriously," he said without preamble. "Linda and I have been discussing your situation, and we think it's time you faced reality." "What reality is that, Michael?" "The reality that you're not getting any younger, and holding on to that house is just creating problems for everyone. It's sitting empty, it's a tax burden, and frankly, it's selfish of you to keep it when we could put that money to good use." "Good use for whom?" "For the family, Mom. For your grandchildren's college funds. For practical things that would benefit everyone." "And what about what I want?" "Mom, you're 80 years old. You're never leaving that nursing home. You need to stop living in fantasies and start thinking about what's best for your family." "My family?" I laughed bitterly. "When was the last time you asked me what I wanted, Michael? When was the last time any of you asked me how I felt, what I needed, what would make me happy? Now we visit you, we call you, we make sure you're taken care of." "You manage me," I interrupted. "You don't visit me, you audit me. You don't call me, you check on me. You don't take care of me, you maintain me. There's a difference." "I don't know what you want from us, Mom. We have our own lives, our own responsibilities." "I want you to love me," I said quietly. "Not as an obligation or a responsibility, but as a person. I want you to visit me because you enjoy my company, not because you feel guilty if you don't. I want you to call me because you want to hear my voice, not because it's on your schedule." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, we do love you." "No, Michael. You love the idea of me. You love the mother you think you should have, not the woman I actually am. You love the version of me that fits conveniently into your life without requiring any real emotional investment. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you asked me about my childhood? When was the last time you wanted to hear a story about your father? When was the last time you asked me what I was reading, what I was thinking about, what I was feeling?" Another silence. "I have to go, Mom. We'll talk about this later." But we never did talk about it later. That was our last real conversation, and it ended with him hanging up in frustration and me sitting in my room, finally understanding that my children were never going to be the family I needed them to be. That night, I called Tommy's house. Sarah answered the phone. "Barbara, is everything okay? You sound upset." "I'm fine, dear. I just wanted to hear a friendly voice." "Of course. Do you want to talk about it?" And so I did. I told Sarah about the conversation with Michael, about the years of feeling like a burden, about the loneliness that had been my constant companion before Tommy came into my life. "You know what, Barbara?" Sarah said after I finished. "You're not alone anymore. You have us, and Tommy asks about you every single day. Yesterday, he told his teacher that his grandma Barbara was the smartest person he knew because you helped him understand fractions." "I'm not really his grandma," I said, though saying it made my heart ache. "Maybe not by blood," Sarah replied. "But you're his grandma in every way that matters, and you're family to us in every way that matters." If this story is touching your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories about the families we choose and the love that transforms lives. 3 weeks later, I had the heart attack that would change everything. I was in the activities room with Tommy, helping him with a science project about the solar system, when I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. This time, though, it didn't go away. It got worse, radiating down my left arm and up into my jaw. "Grandma Barbara?" Tommy said, noticing my distress. "Are you okay?" I don't feel very well, sweetheart," I managed to say. Tommy immediately jumped up and ran to get help. Within minutes, the nursing home staff was there, and an ambulance was called. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I could see Tommy's frightened face, and I heard him tell the paramedic, "Please take care of my grandma Barbara. She's very important to me." At the hospital, the doctors were honest with me. I had suffered a significant heart attack, and while they had managed to stabilize me, there had been damage. My heart was weak, and at 80 years old, the prognosis wasn't good. I might have months, maybe a year if I was lucky. My children were notified by the hospital and came to visit. It was the first time all 4 of them had been in the same room with me in over 3 years. They stood around my bed looking uncomfortable, making small talk about my condition, asking the doctors questions about my treatment options and prognosis. But it was Tommy who climbed into the hospital bed with me, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires. It was Tommy who held my hand. It was Tommy who asked if I was scared. It was Tommy who told me he loved me. "Are you going to die, Grandma Barbara?" he asked, with that directness that only children possess. "Someday, sweetheart, but not today," I told him. "When you do die, will you still be my grandma?" "Always," I promised him. Love doesn't die when people do. The contrast between Tommy's genuine emotion and my own children's awkward, obligatory presence was so stark that even they seemed to notice. Jennifer asked quietly who the little boy was, and when I explained that he was my honorary grandson, she looked confused. "But Mom, you have real grandchildren," she said. "Do I?" I asked. "When was the last time any of them visited me? When was the last time they called me just to talk? When was the last time they acted like they were happy to see me?" The silence that followed was deafening. During my week in the hospital, Tommy and his family visited every day. They brought me flowers, books, and homemade get-well cards. Tommy read to me from his favorite books, told me about what was happening at school, and made sure I knew about every important detail of his life. Sarah helped me with my meals when I was too weak to feed myself. Mark brought me crossword puzzles and sat with me when I couldn't sleep. My own children visited twice during that week. Both times, they stayed for exactly 30 minutes, asked the same questions about my treatment, and left with promises to check in soon. The difference was so obvious that even the hospital staff noticed. One of the nurses, an older woman named Patricia, commented on it while she was checking my vitals. "That little boy sure loves you," she said. "He's been asking about you at the nurses' station every day." "He's special," I said. "So are his parents. They've been taking such good care of you. It's nice to see such a close family." I didn't correct her assumption that Tommy and his parents were my family, because in every way that mattered, they were. When I was released from the hospital, Tommy and his family were there to take me back to Sunset Manor. My own children had offered, but in a way that made it clear it would be inconvenient for them. Sarah and Mark, on the other hand, had insisted on it. "We want to make sure you get settled in okay," Sarah said, "and Tommy has been worried about you." During the ride back to the nursing home, Tommy sat next to me in the back seat, holding my hand and chattering about everything he wanted to show me when we got back to my room. "I watered your daisy plant every day while you were gone," he said proudly. "And I made you a welcome home banner. It's hanging in your room." When we arrived at Sunset Manor, there was indeed a colorful banner hanging in my room that read, "Welcome home, Grandma Barbara," in Tommy's careful handwriting. The daisy plant was thriving on my windowsill, and there were several new drawings taped to my wall. "I wanted to make sure your room was happy for when you came back," Tommy explained. My own children had sent flowers to the hospital, but they hadn't thought to do anything to make my return to the nursing home special. They hadn't thought about what would make me feel welcomed and loved. Over the following months, as my health gradually declined, Tommy and his family remained constant presences in my life. They celebrated my 81st birthday with a surprise party in my room, complete with balloons, cake, and all of Tommy's friends from school singing "Happy Birthday." They included me in their Thanksgiving dinner, bringing a full feast to my room so I could feel part of their family celebration. My own children sent a card for my birthday and called on Thanksgiving. As winter approached, I knew my time was getting short. I was getting weaker, sleeping more, and having more frequent episodes of chest pain. The doctors increased my medications, but we all knew it was just a matter of managing my comfort, not curing my condition. One December Tuesday, Tommy arrived for our usual visit to find me more tired than usual. I had been having a particularly difficult week, and I knew that our weekly visits might be coming to an end soon. "Grandma Barbara, you look really tired," he said, climbing into his usual chair next to my bed. "Are you okay?" "I'm getting sicker, sweetheart," I told him honestly. "My heart is very weak, and the doctors say I might not have much time left." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness that children bring to important things. "Will you be in heaven with my great-grandma Martha?" he asked finally. "I hope so, Tommy." "Will you tell her I said hi?" "Of course I will." "And will you watch over me from heaven?" "Every single day," I promised him. Tommy climbed onto my bed and cuddled next to me, careful not to disturb my oxygen tubes. "I want to tell you something important," he said. "You taught me that being old doesn't mean being invisible. You taught me that everyone has good stories. You taught me that family is about love, not just about being related. You taught me that giving hugs can make sad people feel better." "What else did I teach you?" I asked, treasuring every word. "That chocolate cake makes everything better," he said, with a small smile. "That it's important to visit people who are lonely, that everyone deserves to feel special, and that the best families are the ones you choose to love." I died peacefully in my sleep 2 weeks later, on a quiet Thursday morning in January. Tommy and his family had been by my side the evening before, and Tommy had fallen asleep in the chair next to my bed, holding my hand. Sarah and Mark had gently moved him to the couch in my room, but he had insisted on staying the night. "I don't want Grandma Barbara to be alone," he had said. My children had been notified of my declining condition, but they were dealing with their own busy lives and holiday commitments. Michael was in the middle of a big case. Jennifer was preparing for her daughter's wedding. David was handling year-end business matters, and Susan was dealing with a family crisis in California. They had all promised to visit soon, but soon was too late. The reading of my will took place the following month on a cold February morning. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had arranged for all 4 of my children to be present, along with Tommy's parents, as the trustees of Tommy's inheritance. I wasn't there to see their faces when they learned that their inheritance had been left to a 9-year-old boy they barely knew, but I can imagine their shock, their anger, their inability to understand how their mother could have betrayed them like this. Mr. Henderson later told me, through Sarah, that the meeting had been tense and emotional. He had read my letters aloud, as I had requested, detailing every Tuesday visit, every drawing, every moment of genuine care and attention that Tommy and his family had shown me. "Your mother wanted you to understand," Mr. Henderson had concluded, "that this decision was not made in anger, but in love. She wanted to ensure that the love she received was properly recognized and rewarded." According to Mr. Henderson, Michael had immediately threatened to contest the will, claiming that I had been mentally incompetent and unduly influenced by Tommy's family. But Mr. Henderson had been thorough in documenting my mental state and my reasons for the decision. He had recordings of our conversations, psychiatric evaluations proving my competency, and detailed documentation of my children's neglect. The will was ironclad. Jennifer had cried, saying she never realized how unhappy I had been. David had admitted that he always thought I was fine at Sunset Manor, that I had seemed content during their visits. Susan had flown in from California, saying she had always planned to visit more often but had kept putting it off. But it was too late for apologies and regrets. I was gone, and with me went any chance they had to rebuild our relationship. The house that I had owned, the one my children had assumed would be theirs someday, now belonged to Tommy. Sarah and Mark decided to rent it out and put the money into Tommy's college fund. But they also decided that when Tommy was older, he could choose what to do with it. Tommy, now 9 years old, didn't fully understand the magnitude of what he had inherited. His parents explained that someday he would have money for college, for a house, for whatever dreams he wanted to pursue. But more importantly, they explained that he had inherited these things because of the love he had shown to someone who needed it. "You gave Grandma Barbara something precious," Sarah told him. "You gave her love and respect and kindness when she needed it most. You showed her that she mattered. And this is her way of saying thank you." Tommy keeps the last drawing I made for him, a picture of the two of us sitting in our chairs by the window, holding hands. He asked his parents to frame it and put it in his room, and he tells people about his Grandma Barbara, who taught him that family is about love. The daisy plant from my windowsill now sits on Tommy's desk in his bedroom. He takes care of it every day, watering it and making sure it gets enough sunlight. Sometimes Sarah finds him talking to it, telling it about his day, asking it questions about decisions he's trying to make. "He's learned that love doesn't end when someone dies," Sarah told me in the letter she wrote to my grave. "He's learned that the lessons we learn from people we love stay with us forever." My children have had to grapple with the reality that their mother, the woman who raised them and sacrificed for them, had found more love and connection with strangers than she had with them in her final years. They have had to face the fact that their obligation-based visits weren't enough, that I needed more than just to be managed and maintained. Some people might think what I did was cruel. Some might say that blood should be thicker than water, that I should have forgiven my children's neglect and left them my estate regardless of how they treated me. But I learned that love is a choice, not an obligation. Tommy chose to love me when he didn't have to. His family chose to include me when they could have just been polite. They chose to make me feel valued when they could have simply been cordial. And I chose to reward that love. Tommy is growing up to be exactly the kind of person I hoped he would be. He's kind, compassionate, and deeply aware of other people's feelings. He volunteers at the local senior center, reading to residents and playing games with people who don't have many visitors. He's learned that the greatest gift you can give someone is your time, your attention, and your love. Recently, Sarah told me in another letter to my grave, Tommy had asked to visit other nursing homes to find elderly people who don't have regular visitors. "I want to make sure no one feels invisible like Grandma Barbara did," he had said. That's my legacy. Not the money I left him, not the house or the investments, but the love we shared and the lessons we learned from each other. I taught him that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. He taught me that family is about choice, not just blood. Together, we learned that the most meaningful relationships are often the ones we choose to build, not the ones we're born into. I spent my final years feeling valued, loved, and important because a 7-year-old boy took the time to notice that I was crying and decided to do something about it. He saw me when I felt invisible. He chose to love me when no one else would. And in doing so, He gave me the greatest gift I could have received: the knowledge that my life mattered, that I was worth loving, and that the love I had to give was valuable. That's worth more than any inheritance, any will, any amount of money. That's worth everything. So to everyone listening to this story, remember Tommy. Remember that small acts of kindness can change everything. Remember that the elderly people in your life are not just obligations to be managed. They're people with feelings, with stories, with love to give and receive. Remember that being seen, being valued, being loved is not too much to ask for. And remember that family is not just about blood relations. Sometimes the most meaningful family connections are the ones we choose to build with people who choose to love us back. Don't let it be too late. Don't let the people you love feel invisible. Don't let your obligations replace your relationships. And don't forget that everyone deserves to feel like they matter. Because you never know when a simple "I see you" might change everything. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share it with others. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that remind us how to love better.